All right, hello and welcome everyone. I'm going to get us started. My name is Michelle Higgins. I'm the Manager of Strategic Engagement at SMU DataArts. I am so pleased that you all have joined us today from homes and offices across the country. Before I introduce our presenters and panelists, I'll mention just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions for our panel, please pose those using the Q&A feature. You can do that throughout the presentation. We'll have time for those inquiries towards the end of the hour. If you're having any technical difficulties, please refer to the chat function. My colleague Rochelle will help you dial in. The session today is being recorded, so you should expect to receive a link to the recording from us on Thursday. You're welcome to share that with colleagues and friends. And finally, we love to hear from you, so please be in touch if this webinar brings up thoughts or suggestions about how we can be of service to your community. So I will briefly introduce our panelists who were interviewed for this research in March of this year. We will hear their sage words of wisdom towards the latter half of our time together. First, we have Suzanne Isken. She is the Executive Director of Craft Contemporary since February 2011, where she has led initiatives to support the creation of contemporary craft and build audiences by developing a sizable program of hands-on experiences for the public. Under her direction, the museum has presented landmark exhibitions, which can be found on their website. We're linking that in the chat. Previously, she served as the Director of Education for 10 years at the Museum of Contemporary Art, which followed 10 years of service as Coordinator of School and Teacher Programs and Gallery Educator. She received an MSW degree from the University of Southern California in 1977. She attended the Getty Leadership Program in 2008. And awards include recognition as the 2004 Pacific Region Art Educator of the Year by the National Art Education Association. Thank you, Suzanne, for joining us. Next, we have Arvind Manocha. He served as President and CEO of Wolf Trap Foundation for the Performing Arts since 2013. From major pop acts to children's shows to opera and more, Manocha directs Wolf Trap's year-round performing arts programming, among the most wide-ranging and diverse in the music business. Additionally, he oversees the full scope of the Foundation's educational activities, including its nationally recognized arts education programs, which are implemented at 18 affiliate sites and in 38 states nationwide, and Wolf Trap Opera, one of the nation's premier rising artist training programs. Previously, Manocha was the Chief Operating Officer at the Los Angeles Philharmonic, where he ran the Hollywood Bowl for more than a decade. Manocha holds degrees from Cornell University and the University of Cambridge, where he was a Marshall Scholar. And last but certainly not least, we have Megan Heber. She's currently the Executive Director of Children's Chorus of Greater Dallas, one of the nation's most prestigious youth choral arts programs. She also serves on the City of Dallas Cultural Plan Implementation Steering Committee, the Arts Community Alliance Performing Planning Committee, and University of North Texas Nonprofit Leadership Studies Advisory Committee. Megan is also an adjunct professor of arts management and arts entrepreneurship at the University of North Texas College of Music. Prior to her appointment at the Greater Dallas Children's Chorus, she was Director of Communications, Marketing, and Public Relations for UNT College of Music. And from 2008 to 2013, she served as a clarinetist in the United States Navy Music Program. In 2016, Megan was one of 30 participants from around the world selected for the League of American Orchestra's Essentials of Orchestra Management seminar. So that's our panel, and by now I'll just briefly introduce our host and research author as well. Hopefully by now you know her. Dr. Zannie Voss is the Director of SMU DataArts, as well as a Professor of Arts Management in the Meadow School of the Arts and Cox School of Business at Southern Methodist University. She's an expert on organizational performance, having authored over a dozen published articles on research examining strategic factors that influence the activities of nonprofit arts organizations. Her academic research is informed by a background in professional theater production and management. So Zannie, I'm passing it over to you. We are looking forward to understanding how this research came together.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm going to go ahead and let you all focus on the slides and on the material. What we're going to do today is I'll start with sharing some of the research questions and the methodology, how we approach this research, as well as some key findings. And I want to thank the Wallace Foundation and all of you here for taking the time to learn more about this project. It's an honor to share this webinar with Suzanne, Arvind, and Megan, who imported their wisdom, their time, their experience as participants in the study, which informed our findings, and I get to have a conversation with the three of them. And then we'll have an open community discussion. As Michelle said, when we get to the discussion, please feel free to go ahead and share your questions through the chat function, and they'll share those with us. Before I dive in, I wanted to start just by acknowledging kind of the twin pandemics we're in the words of Donna Walker-Kuhn. This project was not created in response to them. However, this conversation about the link between strategic vision and attaining high performance cannot help but be anchored in the present. The ability to innovate and reconfigure are critical when the environment is this hostile and this turbulent. Change will happen for better or worse. And this really presents an opportunity to contemplate the organization's core values, its strengths, its strategic vision, and its purpose coming out of the crisis. As one of the study participants aptly said, crisis doesn't build character, crisis reveals character, and not just individual character, but the character of organizations and their ability to turn around and serve communities. So about our research questions and methodology, we set out with the partnership and support of Wallace Foundation first to say there are three questions we want to ask. And number one being, what are examples of visual and performing arts organizations that have, number one, either financially outperformed others in substantial ways, or come close to shutting down or win the bottom ranking of performers, but then engineered a financial turnaround? And our approach to identifying organizations in these two categories was to analyze the key intangible performance indicators, or what we call KPIs, on 7 financial and operating metrics over 5 to 7 years. KPIs, we're able to take organizational data through the cultural data profile and from TCG's fiscal survey and link it to community data. So before assessing whether an organization is outperforming expectations, we're able to put it in context, given who it is and where it operates, if it, what its age is, what its budget size is, which arts and cultural sector it happens to be operating in. And I'm pleased to say that this is really an instance of a benefit to CDP participation. It's getting recognized and celebrated for exceptional performance on a variety of measures, and we can't provide insights or identify organizations without data. So that's my plug, and thank you to organizations out there that do participate in the CDP. To look at turnaround organizations, we took another step in the methodology, and we searched for articles on the web announcing an organization's closing, followed by an announcement that it would not close after all. And then we looked at websites of organizations that met the criteria of improved performance over 5 to 7 years to look for evidence of strategy or acknowledgments of strategy driving recovery, rather than just kind of a deus ex machina intervention by a large funder, wanting to make sure it was going to be solid strategy that helped the organization turn around performance. And what we found for discoveries, first, financial distress and bankruptcies tend to make the press only when it concerns a very large organization. There was not a lot that we found in terms of news articles about small organizations. Numerous organizations that made the press for avoiding bankruptcy, however, have yet to demonstrate that they're on stable footing when you look at the data. In other words, there's no evidence of a turnaround, only failure avoidance. And the vast majority of organizations that performed in the bottom ranking of performance at the start of the period also performed below average at the end of the period, despite some improvement. However, many organizations that were below average, but not at the very bottom of the rankings of performers at the start of the period, engineered substantial improvement. So it was really interesting to us to acknowledge, to recognize that there seems to be a sweet spot, even if organizations are not quite at average, of having that ability to turn around performance, that there are some aspects of management that really see the light in terms of being able to turn around the situation. Participant description. We had 10 high performers, 10 turnaround organizations, and here you see kind of the distribution of participants by arts and cultural sector. We tried to get a good even distribution of a variety of organizational sizes. For the high performers, 126 organizations met the initial criteria to varying degrees. We had 23 strong candidates and wound up interviewing 10. You'll see in both cases, the median budget for organizations was around $2 million, and mean budget was in the $7 to $7.5 million range, meaning that the average, the mean, was skewed somewhat by some really large organizations, but they were not the norm. In the paper itself, which I hope you'll download from the website, you'll find a lot more depth of information about the methodology. So here we were describing how we identified organizations. From there, we said, let's learn from these organizations. What kinds of strategies were used to achieve this financial performance? And were there particular contexts or conditions in which these strategies seemed to be more effective? Here, in order to answer these questions, we had to talk with people. The methodology we used was what's called theories in use. It seeks to capture what is the mental model of how things work from the perspective of individuals who are closest to the problem. So it's a series of semi-structured interviews. We spent an hour with each participant and then distilled down what we learned. And in a nutshell, kind of here's what we found. And just a note that the project timeframe was January 15th to March 11th in terms of the interviews. So the COVID crisis was really just starting to ramp up, and we were hearing about it in some of the final interviews. High-level observations. Interestingly, high-performing organizations, when we spoke with them, were at one point turnaround organizations. And that common strategic elements breed success for both cohorts. So high performers were not turnaround within the 5 to 7 years, but in speaking with them at some point earlier in their history, they were. We learned that success takes a slow, controlled burn. There's no single action or miracle moment that provides transformation. We also learned that success is not accidental or haphazard. All interviewees possess a mental map or a playbook for how success happens. And so I'm going to share with you that playbook, that mental map. It starts with the question of how will you have created value and for whom? What are the cornerstones of success? The cornerstones of high performance appear to lie in the alchemy of high standards in the creation of work that's meaningful to the local community. Therein lies the formula for strategic vision, or the organization's answer to the question, how will you have created value and for whom? It's the value proposition. Some organizations never get this right. It's a deceptively simple statement with profound implications. And these two elements, high quality performance standards and community orientation, are both necessary conditions. It's not an either or, it's a both and. Artistic programmatic excellence is widely shared as a key strategic goal among many arts and cultural organizations. You see that time and time again with respect to excellence being written in mission statements. The community orientation forces organizations to think whether and how they serve more segments of the community. Now, when organizations provide programming that makes them relevant only to a small slice of the community, they not only expose themselves to risk when that narrow slice diminishes in size with shifting demographics, but they also miss opportunities to increase their footprint of relevance. So the instinct should be to ask, why doesn't the organization provide more programming that other segments of the community, those whom we have not historically served, but the entire community would find relevant? Understanding what programming will be meaningful and relevant to the community requires getting out of the organization and participating reciprocally, listening, learning, responding, all of which lead to relationship building. So asking the question, how can we serve you to the community and to other community organizations? How would you like to be involved? As one participant said, ask for the truth and have the humility to hear it. Active probing and listening are the only ways to discover what people value, what they find meaningful, and what needs they have that the organization can consider meeting. When these cornerstones are in place, they pave the way for short-term tactical wins that inspire confidence. build excitement. It's the answer to what are the signs that strategy is getting traction. It's the early wins, building the brand, strengthening relationships with board, with employees, with external stakeholders who begin to buy into the organization's strategy for success. It's that first spark of excitement as everyone starts to coalesce behind the organization because they see the promise in relevance. Internal and external factors moderate or increase or mitigate the organization's ability to translate these cornerstones into positive short-term outcomes. External threats to an organization's ability to achieve short-term gains are downward trends such as changes in consumer preferences that were attributable to high-quality substitutes and shifts in institutional priorities, local population changes, policy changes such as the impact of tax reform on individual contributions. All of these were headwinds that organizations were facing even before the current crises. Certainly, the effects of COVID virus, which escalated in severity as the interviews went on, and the recent racial and social justice uprisings that have altered communities in unparalleled ways. All of these impact the ability of the cornerstones to have that traction through short-term wins. Internal moderating factors are super important and were addressed by all of the organizations. Internal factors include mission alignment. So once there's clarity around the organization's mission and its vision for excellent relevant programming in the context of its community, staff and board members have to embrace that vision and align all organizational decisions behind it. A strong foundation is maximized when there's mission alignment throughout the organization that permeates all decision making. It flourishes in a positive, healthy culture. And some of the key characteristics of a healthy culture were repeatedly described as trust, transparency, open communication, participatory management style, respect, positive energy. Building and repairing trust was particularly critical for organizations in a turnaround. High performance requires a balance of steadfastness in mission alignment, but also capacity to adapt as needed. So adaptive capability embodies a learning orientation where organizations are willing to modify programming and operations, shift course in response to feedback and to new information. They see and seize opportunities and know when plans have to be modified in order to stay relevant. It requires investment in professional staff, whether at the executive level or marketing and fundraising talent. And strategic plans are built on a multi-year horizon. In and of itself, the very act of creating a roadmap to attaining and retaining financial stability feeds optimism. Short-term goals, these short-term wins, reinforce the organization's strategic vision, kind of feed it. They also lead to the flywheel starting to turn. So what does balanced growth look like once the flywheel starts to turn? It starts to turn as short-term outcomes translate into intermediate outcomes of balanced growth. So increased audience and donor participation and engagement, this relationship growth and development, as well as increased organizational capacity. So as the organization's growing, is it allowing the staff to grow adequately in order to meet the increased programmatic activity and increased audience and donor participation and engagement? These resource and relationship wins have positive impact for the organization in two ways. First, they too reinforce the community orientation and advance its ability to achieve high quality programmatic standards. Environmental factors, again, come into play in moderating the short-term outcomes' ability to translate into intermediate outcomes. And the intermediate outcomes also lead to long-term wins. Long-term financial stability, provided that the organization has the discipline to stay within its means, make conservative strategic decisions in the face of uncertainty. And it looks from this model as though increased financial stability is the ultimate goal. It's not. Since arts and cultural organizations exist for mission fulfillment and not financial sustainability, what we really end up seeing is sort of a virtuous cycle where long-term outcomes of financial stability support the ability to maximize mission success. And so rather than walk through each of the elements and steps in depth while sharing interview quotes. I've had the great pleasure of sharing this webinar with 3 of the project participants, Suzanne, Arvind, and Megan, who are going to speak firsthand to their model of how success happens. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask each of you, if you could, to go ahead and start your video. Great. Arvind, Megan, Suzanne, thank you so much for joining me. I had the pleasure of speaking with each of you prior to mid-March, so prior to the pandemic starting ramping up. We also want to hear about how you're faring right now in this environment. So let's go ahead and start there. Are there aspects of these different strategic elements that appear in the model that you find more critical than others during this time? And if so, can you offer any examples of them? How is it being lived in your organizations currently? Suzanne, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
It's so interesting to hear you go through this. I think for us, this real reliance on community and needing to bring people together. I think a lot of what allowed us to grow was our ability to bring people together at the site, and we saw that we had a need to bring people together online. So we started creating events such as Bring Your Own Craft, where people could actually come together and share things that they were doing, and we could kind of amass a family group and people could feel connected again. And I think that was really important to our feeling better about what, the staying at home and being so disconnected.
That's great. Arvind, how about at Wolf Trap?
I think back on that slide and some of the conversations we've had in the past, and I think about risk and reward and the confidence in taking risks, and having been through that cycle and building a sense of confidence amongst the team that success can come from taking risks and going into places you haven't been. I feel like that's the underlying subtext of every conversation these days, because we're all trying to do things that we haven't really done before in exactly this way. To Suzanne's point, we're trying to find different ways to create community or create connectivity, whether it be online, whether it be in different ways that we normally do. But it does mean taking risks on a daily basis. I think a lot of and also the timing of that. I mean, I think about some of the conversations we have in the virtual office, so to speak, about the time in which we have to make a decision, and we may not have all the tools at our disposal that we would normally call upon to go through the planning cycle and really think about the outcomes and then pull the trigger. We have to move quickly. We have to find new ways of doing things without a lot of time to study, plan, and learn from others. But I think that willingness to take the risk when you're driven by the sense that we need to continue to find a way to fulfill our obligation to our community. We don't have time. There's no time to waste, so to speak. You can't wait to figure out what's going to happen next. We don't know what the timeline of this whole pandemic is going to be. So you have to act immediately and with a sense of urgency.
Great. Megan?
I keep thinking that we'll eventually stop saying how unprecedented these times are, but these times are certainly unprecedented. Looking at the report, I'd say for us, the 2 most critical aspects is really how we went through our turnaround too, is our high program standards, and then also the community orientation section. Having a deep understanding of our assets, of our value, our relevance to the community, and really our differentiating characteristics, what about us makes us unique, has helped us shift, redesign, prioritize, and rethink. For us, we did make the decision to shift our programming from in-person to entirely online for the fall semester. As you can imagine, the risks of having 500 children in one location at one time singing is quite a lot. So we're in the process of still having as much high quality programming as we can. We're recording more than 300 teaching modules this semester to do that. And then redesigning our program to try to take advantage of all of this virtual options. The decision has also really strangely opened up many opportunities for us, especially how to solve those 2 barriers to arts participation that we've always struggled with. time, as you all know, and geographic location, having to have people come to a certain place at a certain time in a certain way. So now that we're moving to virtual, it really means that we can access content, our singers can access content 24/7 from their homes, and they don't have to travel to us at a certain time. So it's exciting to think about the opportunities that might come long-term from this, while of course stopping and breathing and realizing that, yes, this is very unprecedented and strange.
Well, that comment just makes me think, within the model, we talk about going from the cornerstones to, throughout the interviews, there was a sense that it was so important to get that first early win, that thing where everybody started to say, yes, this can work. Yes, we're on the right path. I'm curious, within your organizations, have you felt like there has been kind of that early win, during this COVID period where you felt like, okay, we're kind of moving out of the sense of reaction to being proactive and having some success that we can communicate about?
I can speak to that a little bit, since you didn't call on it. I think that as you try new things, they don't always take off, and I think that once you reach that level, I think we have a teen program and we had 3 years of funding, and one of my biggest fears was, this is our last year of funding for that we have lined up for this program, and how, what do we do now? The teens, like, how could you bring teens online for a year-long program after school, and how will that work, and can we really do this? And I think I was already talking to funders and saying, can we take a year off and hibernate, I guess is the word you use. And the staff said, no, we really want to do this. So then we tried to do this, and our teachers are out missing, and we can't really make we can't really communicate well with teens, and then we got it going, and we got 23 kids signed up for to interview and get onto the program. And I think that once we reached those numbers, there was a lot of okay, now with perseverance we can make these things happen. We will persevere, and I think to that end, I think these smaller organizations are really well equipped, exactly as you said, to try something and then try it again, and then try it again in a different way, and keep it moving.
Great, thank you. Arvind?
I think to echo something Suzanne said, you try a lot of things. Not everything works exactly the way you would like the first time out, but in our case, I think there's a couple of things that we look to really early in our education work, because the education community is obviously all moving to distance learning and remote learning, and there's just a natural move in that direction. We were happy to see that we were able to make that move as quickly as we were, but also that our partners throughout the country kind of stuck with us, that rhythm of interaction and engagement continued somewhat unabated, even though the format in which it was happening was obviously very distant or very different. On a flip side, for something that didn't go digital, we have an opera training program, and we were really committed early in the pandemic, particularly with our director of that program, to how can we find ways to continue to provide that training experience for these very, very talented young singers who are really suffering because all of their engagements have been canceled, and there's an interruption in their art making and their music making for this year. And so we decided that we actually were going to not do that totally online or digitally. We actually did bring close to 30 artists from around the country here to our campus. We decided that we would invest the time and resources to create a bubble, a quarantine bubble that really they only lived in, and then did a lot of the training work in a very, very safe and responsible way, much smaller groups, not ensembles, distant, but also taking advantage of the fact that we have a large outdoor space available to us. We're the National Park for the Arts. We have a lot of outdoor pavilions, places where the singing could happen in the open air. And a side benefit of that is, while we weren't organizing, new productions of operas for paying audiences sitting in a theater, people in the community use the park every day, probably more so than usual because everyone is outside and trying to find ways to get out of the house and go out with their children and just have some outdoor time. And you go out into the park and you would hear these singers, rehearsing or working on scenes from some distant pavilion, and you weren't really even sure where that sound was coming from. But it did provide a little bit of that artistic breath into the national park for the arts, which I thought was a nice way of saying, even though we might not be able to do it the way we normally did, art was made in our nation's art park for this year. When history is written, we're not going to say we took a total break this year from having the creation and celebration of artistry happen in that shared space that belongs to all of us.
I'm sorry that I wasn't there to hear that. That sounds fabulous, wandering around the park and hearing singers. Megan?
Like Suzanne, we also, of course, considered the option of hibernating for the year. And when we started thinking about that, there was such a initial push of a demand for something. So that demand for something really made us decide to take the risk of just redesigning the delivery method of how we do programming while trying to preserve as much as possible. So our early win was when we sent out the letters announcing this change. We ended up having 80% of our participants opt into the program. And that was much higher than we expected. Budget-wise, it lets me breathe and sleep a little bit better at night. But I think that really came from the trust that those we serve have in our programming and the trust and the brand that we've built to really enhance and improve the lives of those that we serve. So they knew that we would do whatever we could to have that high quality programming that they're used to.
Wow. Those are all very inspiring moments where you hear so many organizations are really kind of just struggling to figure out what to provide and how to do so. Let's go back and just take a step sort of pre-COVID now, because it seems to me that for all of you, your current strategies are such an outgrowth of your previous success. And the integrity of the ways that you approach your work. Can I ask each of you just to share with folks, this idea of community orientation, what has it really meant? How has taken that perspective forced you to see the work the programming that you provide perhaps in different ways? How have you had to adapt what you may have inherited in an organization into something that has a really strong sense of relevance? I'm going to go backwards and ask Megan to start us off there.
So one of the most beneficial strategies I've employed for the community orientation aspect is really looking at our current assets and strengths and then trying to take it a level deeper, thinking about the bigger impact and thinking about the bigger picture. I've been an executive director for 3 years now, and we've really had to look beyond our own organization and into the needs of the community itself. External and internal buy-in really was important because then we began having a bigger picture of relevance. And we did this without even redoing our own programming. You can take the assets you have and just kind of reinvent them and recreate them and position them in a different way. For example, when I came into the organization, I noticed that there was a really unusual concert structure that was being used. As you can imagine, moving 6 choruses of 80 children on and off a stage takes time. There's these breaks, these 2 to 3 minute gaps in transitions. And our artistic director many years ago, she had a friend at the concert who said how much he loved the singing, but how boring the concert was because of the long pauses of silence. So after kind of getting herself back off the floor, she realized, well, this is like the perfect opportunity to provide some additional curriculum building in these pauses, in these gaps. So she started hiring guest artists to perform during these dead times, and our interlude project, which is what we call it, was really born from this. And it's grown from a simple harpist, one performer, into a curriculum tool that enhances the concert's theme. So we've had scientists perform experiments on stage during concerts about nature and science. We've had poetry winners from the local library here read their works during a concert about composers' use of text. So all this was in place. And when I came in, I was really just amazed by how different this was and how it was something I hadn't really seen before. And I realized that there was a missed opportunity for further deepening this and making it a bigger impact for the entire Dallas arts ecosystem. As all of us know, arts attendance is declining, and the single biggest predictor of a participation as an adult is attendance as a child. So we also had 3 very difficult groups for art organizations to reach in our concert halls. We had young children, we had diverse communities, and we have parents who will be empty nesters soon and ready to, again, participate in the arts. So they're buying subscriptions, they're coming to see the concerts, to see their children perform. Why not take that opportunity to really start building that structure that when they're ready to participate in adult arts, then they've already been exposed, they've already been touched by all these other organizations. So we started a collaborative marketing initiative with all of these different organizations and guest artists. And we do list sharing now. They are invited to come talk to our parents and our singers at rehearsals. We give concert discounts to their patrons. They give concert discounts to their patrons. And it's really become this wonderful opportunity to be community oriented and take something, again, that we were already currently doing, but reach deeper and reach more into that community aspect of building a stronger arts ecosystem.
I love that story. That's really exciting. Arvind?
I think a lot of organizations like ours obviously strive to be relevant in the community. I think these are kind of fundamental ideals that we all share. We often talk in the office and also to our constituents and supporters about really feeling strongly that even though our concert businesses are by far our largest, have the biggest public profile, more so than the opera training and more so than the education and teacher training work that we do, we don't ever want people to see us as a transactional destination, as a place to go and spend money and get a concert. We want people to see us for who we think we are, which is a community resource, someone that is providing, or an institution that is helping make the community as strong as it is. And thinking about our decision-making through that lens, often leads us to be reminded that while we program year-round in multiple venues, our biggest concert season is in the summer, where we partner with the National Park Service to program the National Park for the Arts. And what that really means for us as we're thinking about usage and audience and who's on the stage is always remembering that our venue, so to speak, literally belongs to all of us. It belongs to the American people as a national park. It's not municipalities, it's not owned by us, it's not owned by a benefactor. We don't pay rent on it in that sense because it actually is a public national asset. And I think that influences so many of the decisions we make when we think about, is the community represented at the park, both on stage and in the audience? But I wanted to just add, because I think we'd all do, first and foremost, think about that level of engagement at the community level. What is the art that we're making and who are the audiences that we're attracting? But when we made I came on board in 2013 and we were thinking about programming, and of course everybody has a new way of doing it, and so we're revamping and kind of getting ready for the 2014 season. What was very clear to me is it also had to come with a similar change in approach to the advertising, marketing, and communication side as well. And we can't forget how important it is when you're trying to make connections in a community to not just think about the representation on stage, but think also about what is the outreach and the level of engagement at the community level we're making. Some of that comes person to person, some of that comes community leader to community leader. Some of it is, where are you spending money in advertising? Where are you spending money, time, and resource in communication outreach? Are you building a sustained program of engagement as opposed to dipping in on a one-off for one specific concert or one specific artist? Because ultimately, the goal is not just to sell the ticket. It's not the transactional destination. It's the community resource aspect of it. Are we a connected entity in this community? And this community means all of our communities. And that's a multi-year effort. And I think that's something that sometimes can be harder to envision and stick with, because sometimes the payoff on that doesn't appear in the next season or in the next, concert that you're trying to promote. This is a payoff that's a much longer term trajectory.
And you're seeing it get traction.
Yeah, I mean, I do think we find as the years go on a continued broadening of who we are. And I think that's ultimately, on some very primordial level, the goal. Can we broaden the definition of who we are?
Very exciting. Suzanne.
When I came in 2011 to what was then the Craft and Folk Art Museum, we really had to build audience from scratch. And I had come from being a director of education. So I was very oriented toward programs and building programs as a way of building audience. Our exhibition budget was minuscule. So the kinds of exhibitions we were doing were pretty DIY at the time, and people did not necessarily come to us for our exhibitions. I made the important decision to really get rid of most children's programs and school programs. We did not start with that because we knew that building audience would have to come through adults, and adults who might support us with memberships or spread the word, and that we didn't think kids were necessarily people who could build word of mouth, and we knew word of mouth was really important. So we went really hard on programs. My old boss, who I saw on this call as one of the participants, actually had given me a wonderful gift when I was director of education of sending me to Dallas when they were doing their those Friday night programs. Mm-hmm. And we came back and did a program at Mocha called Night Vision. And I fell in love with people making art and drinking at the same time. And there was nothing that warmed my heart more than a glass of wine and somebody doing their art project. So I immediately brought that. We were a craft museum after all. So we were actually able early on to partner with Etsy, who I don't know what they actually did for us, but it was a great name to be partnered with, and do these craft nights with wine and beer. And we were able to get beer donations, and it became a really great way to start to build communities. And I learned in my old job that you had to do it every month. Like you had to have I used to say to my staff, they wake up on the first Thursday of the month, and every first Thursday of the month, rain or shine, you're going to have this program. And that's really important. And sure enough, it starts out small and it grows and it grows and it grows. And we built several programs by that. Despite a budget that was originally like $600,000 a year, we were doing up to 90 programs a year, which we still do. It's a very, very program-heavy museum. We started out doing some really magnificent exhibitions, but people didn't see us for that. And I think part of that also had to do with our name, that people associated us with kind of Americana and a folk art that we had never actually been associated with. So over time, that was another thing we did. And I want to say one more strategy that we used back then was to invite organizations, craft, to come and work out of our space. And one of them was the Yarn Bombers of LA. And they met, I don't know if it was weekly or I think monthly. And they proposed a community project that was kind of brilliant, where they did this huge call out for granny squares, and they covered our entire building with granny squares. And it called a lot of attention to our building. We had no marketing budget, but when people drove by, suddenly this building that they had been in the neighborhood since 1930, people would come by and say, I never noticed your building before. And suddenly we were able to do that, and that was another program that we then adopted, which was using artists. If slide number 2 that you showed was our facade with this great painting by Brett Spears, also known as Shrine, so that the building really stood out, and that was kind of our first really big marketing venture to get us a little bit known in the community.
Very exciting. I'm going to encourage those who have joined us as participants, if you have questions that you'd like to pose to the panelists, or if you have questions about the research, to submit them through the chat button. And I'm going to, in the meantime, keep going with additional questions because I love hearing from you guys. I will say on a personal level, what do you think makes you such a successful leader in your community? And I know every community is different, but clearly there's an aspect to the work that you're doing, that to your leadership, that has brought people together and brought people to your organization. What do you attribute that to? And what could somebody else learn from your leadership style? Arvind?
I was thinking, as you were asking that question first, though, about as an institution, how would I attribute our leadership attributes as an institution in the community? And I think part of that really has to focus on consistency. And I don't mean consistency of program, because of course that's going to change over time and over the decades. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about consistency of delivery, because that also will change as technology changes, or if we're in a pandemic, for example, and things have to change. Okay. But I think one of the things that one could point to with Wolf Trap over its 50-year history is a very consistent approach to authenticity in the community. And there's a trust then that builds amongst the people and the institution, where I think I can say with confidence that for our audiences in our, let's say, local area, the folks who come to the concerts physically, I think there's always been a sense that the experience they will have will be free of artifice, that it will not be exploitative, that it will be mutual and mutually benefacting, that there is a partnership that we are creating, and that what we promise we will deliver on, which means also not over-promising at times. It also means obviously not under-promising and surprising in a negative way. But I think that people feel, and I think we see this in this pandemic, when we are so humbled and grateful for the continued support of so many of our patrons and donors and benefactors, particularly when we're not really delivering on the core of the concert experience. I think it's because, for many, many years, if not decades, their families have had a relationship with us as family. And it's the consistency of treating our audiences like family, with respect, not as a source of ticket income or purely, a donation, but rather a relationship that ultimately they feel positive about wanting to support and nurture and ensure that it exists for their children.
Great. Those are certainly words to live by with respect to the authenticity and the consistency in the community presence. Megan and Suzanne, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it might be cliche, but I agree. It is about those relationships and those connections that you have within the community and within those that you're serving. While most of our families spend about 9 years in our program, so they really become a very stable and consistent activity that they participate in most of their childhood, half of their childhood. And these one-on-one relationships not only strengthens your knowledge of the community that you're serving, but it also opens up dialogues for communication and collaboration. That interlude project that I mentioned is only successful because of the relationships that we have with the organizations and the guest artists. It's really about getting to know them, understanding their needs, and then working together to make sure that it's a success. So I guess everyone has something to share, something to give, and something of value. And going out there and meeting these people and learning about that is the way that we've undertaken this question.
Great. Thank you, Megan.
And I want to add to that two things. I really think one important thing is that at some point when you start out and things are really not very great, your board actually needs to feel good about the organization, and the board has to have faith and trust that you are worth the investment and the time. And I think that for us came through actually the Taproot Foundation, who had come to help us with our messaging and had done some surveys and fed back to the board really great positive messages about us. And I can't say enough about the pro bono professional assistance we've gotten over the years. And that I think has been essential to us. We've had a couple opportunities to get really, really great input via Melody Kamshat at the Getty Leadership Institute and Taproot twice, and some of the other organizations. They've really given us things that have been, life-changing for our organization.
Great. I'm sure this is all resonating with those of us who have the benefit to hear that wisdom. There are a few questions that have come in, so I'm going to start with the first is, does anyone have a suggestion for the first best step to helping board and staff shift to having a community orientation? And I will leave the floor open rather than calling on one of you.
I have a few suggestions, since that was a major thing we did when I started about 3 years ago. I think it's very important to make sure that everybody is aligned on expectations and also what you're trying to accomplish. Again, that mission, that true north, that guiding factor, having that always be touched and always reflected on by both the board, the staff, and yourself is one of the first important steps. For us, we spent a lot of time that first year at a long board retreat, talking about community, talking about orientation, talking about impact, and really doing kind of a class 101 on why that's important and how that could strengthen the organization as a whole. Sometimes I think that we tend to gloss over some of that board education that is really, really important to make sure everybody's aligned on expectations and roles and standards. So that was one way that we started introducing that concept of community orientation. We also do have a board report card that the board each individual fills out at each board meeting, and it's confidential. Only the staff records it for the next board meeting use. But that kind of lets them check off these things that we've agreed upon about community orientation and about development and fundraising and communication networking. So it's a good reminder that they have to, again, grade themselves on how they had done since the last board meeting to really espouse those values and keep it at the forefront of their mind.
Thank you, Megan. Arvind, Suzanne, anything to add?
Not really. I think one of the things that I think about is the communication around those values and the community orientation. I mean, I feel like in my organization, in any case, I feel that's been strong from the beginning. It wasn't a shift that we had to make, but that being said, I think one shouldn't be complacent about it in terms of making sure, as you get new folks into the building and new folks into your orbit, of remembering and reminding ourselves what it is that we do and why we do it. And I think making sure that you don't lose sight of that focus is maybe as important as creating that focus the first time.
Thank you.
I paraphrased it for my board as talk about it like we were your children. Because I realize people are always bragging about their kids. I said, we want you, when you meet people at the cocktail party, we want you to say, and I want to tell you about what my museum's doing. So.
We have another question, and this probably is going to be our last one since we only have 5 minutes left. It says, envisioning a post-COVID world, how do you think your institution will change? Will it revert to pre-COVID strategy, or has COVID changed your institution? How it will perform and be viewed?
Wow, thinking about a post-COVID world is that's a great thing to think about. That in itself is something to celebrate. I think, of course, will change. The things that we're picking up and figuring out how to do now that we, might have done to some degree, but are leaning into, or particularly on the digital side, I think everybody is. I think we're all tired of talking about pivoting, and if anyone tells me to pivot again, I'll probably lose it. But we have created new skills. We are doing things differently, and I think it adds richness to what we were doing pre-COVID. And I hope, if there is any silver lining to all of this, is that when we come out of this, we will be able to marry some of the new ways of engagement, particularly on the digital side, with the core of what we do, which I think will always be the in-person and the bringing together of society. That's the kind of performing arts world that we're in. But yeah, I think the lessons learned and the lessons about adaptation and working through crisis. Not every staff member has worked through a crisis like that. Well, certainly no one's worked through this level of crisis, but
Right.
we're all learning about how to cope in very, very new ways, and that can only make us stronger as professionals in the future.
Great. Thanks, Arvind. Suzanne, Megan?
I mean, it's not just COVID. I mean, we've had several crises over this period of time, and one of them has been really, museums and arts organizations have been really called upon to really, look at all their practices, especially as it relates to anti-racism and access and inclusion. So I think that a lot of what we'll be doing when we go back, I mean, hopefully we really want to recapture what we have, but I think community outreach will be really on top of the list in ways that are probably new and also old, maybe bringing back old ways that we've done.
Megan?
To echo those two statements, I do think we will be a different organization as we move forward through this. We will probably go back to some of our core programming, but there's the question of maybe there's additional opportunities now that we hadn't done in the past. Those two unicorns, that time and geographic constraint for arts participation, a lot of us are having to solve that right now because we have no choice but to solve that right now. So reaching into those new communities, reaching into the places where we haven't been able to get before is a big opportunity, I think, for all of us when we survive all of this. And I hope that this really leads to more collaborations and more partnerships within the nonprofit sector, within the nonprofit and for-profit sector, that we might not have the tools as a small staff, but someone we know might have those tools, and building those programs together, I hope, is something that stays as we move out of the COVID crisis and the other crises that we are facing right now.
It's great, this idea of just continuing the adaptive capability and sharpening that. It is in some respects a strange, but it could be a wonderful opportunity. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And in doing so, I want to first thank my heartfelt thanks to the three of you, to Arvind, to Suzanne, and to Megan. Thank you for taking the time to share these insights now. Thank you for sharing your wise counsel, your wisdom, your experience. And thank you to all of the project participants who may be with us today. It was really a generous commitment and a generosity of sharing your experience with the field. So thank you for that. In the report, you'll find that there's a significant depth of detail that we weren't able to cover today. And I encourage you to check it out on the website. You'll also find there more about what we learned, but also some information about limitations of the study and sort of general questions that we came away with that will help in terms of thinking about future directions. This project, it's a great example of how to put data to work, and it was a joy to partner with the Wallace Foundation in doing so. We invite all of you who are with us on the call to contact us with your ideas for future research. The data is there to be explored. Megan, Suzanne, Arvind, thank you so very much. And please keep in touch with us.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.